Hey everyone, this is Lulu from As You Wish Pottery. In this video, we'll be recreating this beautiful watercolor succulent platter. Before we get started, we want to make sure that we trace our image onto tissue paper. On the lesson plan, you have some instructions on how to go about that. So go ahead and get started by tracing everything over with tissue paper using a pencil. And then once you're done, what we're going to do is we're going to transfer the tissue paper sheet and we're going to place it on top of our platter, kind of as centered as best as we can. And then we're going to just follow along the lines with a marker. On the lesson plan, you'll also have a little bit of space so you can trace your lettering, so make sure that you do that before you completely finish the tracing process. So now we're going to move on to painting. So for this platter, we're going to be using a lot of watercolors. So what that means is we're going to add some water to our paint and we're going to get it to the consistency of milk. And once we have it really nice and loose, we're going to be able to start painting with it. Keep in mind, I'm not doing strokes. I'm actually just kind of dabbing on the paint. So I just pick up paint from my brush and then I tap on the surface. Sometimes I like to add a little bit more water if I need the color to be a little bit looser, but this is just total preference. Also remember that the more you layer, the darker the color will be. So I don't want it to be too dark because I'm going to be using another color to darken up some areas. So for right now, I'm just trying to get all my surfaces kind of covered with the watercolor color that I'm using right now. So for this, I'm using Kermit. As you saw, I watered it down. I got a really nice consistency on it, and now I'm just painting some of the cactuses or some of the succulents you'll see. Remember that the image on the lesson plan also shows you the piece itself, so that way you can kind of see what's going to be painted with what color. So as you go, you can just follow along by looking at your plate or your platter image and also watching here how I'm going in and painting the succulents and the cactuses that are with this color as I'm painting them on. I also want to point out that for this part I'm using the medium round brush, but just know that you can really use any brush that you like, whatever brush makes you feel the most comfortable. So if you wanted to go and use something a little bit smaller, you're more than welcome to do that. I like to do all my larger things with a larger brush, and then I like to switch out to my smaller brush later on. So you see that here I'm just using that medium round brush and I'm just kind of getting all the larger shapes done first. Alrighty, so next I'm going to switch out to my small round brush, and with this one I'm just going to paint the smaller leaves that are around the succulent. So there's two sets of leaves that are done with this brush, and just know that I'm still using the Kermit color. I might want to add a little bit more paint so that way it's a little bit thicker for me and a little bit brighter. And for this one I am doing brush strokes just because I do want to cover that surface a better way than the watercolor effect. Okay. Another thing to note too is that when I am painting anything watercolor related, I'm making sure that I kind of have a visual of how many layers everything is taken. That way I don't overload my my image and I can still see my lines. So just be aware that as you're painting along, as you're doing your fillings, you are kind of going light-handed, and then remember that we'll thicken up or we'll darken up areas later on. As you see, I'm using that small round brush to add the last details with Kermit. So this is just the cactus stems for the flowers. So these ones will be done with the same green and everything. And I also did that little succulent that's sprouting out from the cactus. So just be aware of that. Alrighty, so now I'm going to mix a little bit of my Kermit green with a small dot of Teal Tomorrow, and this will just darken up my paint enough to create a darker shade of the green, which then I'll use with the small brush to kind of add some darker parts to my succulent. So just be aware that I'm doing this on all the centers of the leaves, so all the leaves have kind of like a little area where they overlap one another, and that's the parts that I'm covering up with the darker green. This is just to give it kind of more of a three-dimensional effect, so that way it looks a little bit more realistic. There is no right or wrong way to do this. this. You just want to fill the space just as you see fit, and just as you're going along, you'll see that things become a little bit more realistic looking and whatnot, and that's what we're trying to go for. And just know that I'm doing this to all the things I painted with green, so all the cactuses, all the succulents. I'm just adding a little bit of darker shading just to give them that little extra depth effect, you know, making it look a little bit more realistic, a little bit more watercolor, that kind of thing. Alrighty, so now I'm gonna make some more of my darker green mixture, just because I ran out, and as you see, it's just a little bit of green and a little bit of teal tomorrow, just to darken up that green a little bit. And I'm going to be using that small detail brush to create kind of squiggly lines on the cactus to the right, or to the left of the platter, and on the succulent to the right. So as you see, the lines are very messy. They don't have to be perfect at all when it comes to the cactus, and same thing when it comes to the succulent. The only thing you have to note is that I put a kind of a squiggly line on each of the petals, just to give the petals, or give the leaves a little bit more of an effect, or more of a realistic look to them. So just be aware, there's no right or wrong way to do this. This is just for fun, just to add an extra layer of something cool happening to each leaf. Alrighty, so now I'm going to be watering down the Jumpin' Juniper. I'm just doing a little bit of the paint. I also wanted to point out that when I mix, or when I'm trying to watercolor my paints, I do small batches, just because it allows me to have a little bit more control, and I still have some extra paint, just in case I make it too watery or I run out. I can definitely go back in and add another coat, another layer, or keep using the color as I like to. So just be aware that I don't mix all my colors right away. I'm just going in little by little, and then with this Jumpin' Juniper, I grabbed my medium round brush again, and I'm just painting the surface of that succulent that's right in between the cactus and the green succulent. Now with the same color, I'm going to be painting the little leaves to the top left of the platter. Just note that you might need to change your brush to the small round brush, and I would also suggest that you add a little bit more paint, just so that way your paint is not too watercolor, not too light, but it's up to you. If you feel like you want to add it that way, you're more than welcome to do that. I'm going to be doing the cactus towards the right top side of the platter, using that same Jumpin' Juniper color and the same small brush. So just keep in mind, this one I'm just kind of dabbing in the leaves itself, just like I did pretty much on the other version of this, and I'm just trying to make sure that my surface is covered and that all my leaves look saturated in color. So next I'm gonna darken up a little bit of the Jumpin' Juniper by mixing it with Teal Tomorrow, and I'm gonna be using the small detail brush to paint just a little bit of shadows in that succulent. So just be aware that I'm just darkening up some spots around wherever they fit best. Now I'm watering down some double mint and painting the center of the succulent to the bottom left with that kind of watercolor mixture. So keep in mind, all I'm doing is just the center petals or leaves. I'm not going too out, just because I will cover that surface with another color. Now I'm going to change out to my small round brush again, and I'm going to be using double mint to paint a smaller leaf inside the Jumpin' Juniper leaves to the top left. Just keep in mind, this is just an extra accent. You could really omit this if you don't want to paint it, or if you feel like it's too much or you're running out of time, whatever the case is. You can definitely omit this part. I just like to add that extra shade of a different color on top of that blue. I thought that looked really pretty, but you can also change it to another color, whatever suits your boat. So now I'm going to be darkening up that double mint with just the smallest amount of Teal Tomorrow. Keep in mind, Teal Tomorrow is a really powerful color, so I mostly use it just to add a little bit of extra shade to another color. So when I'm mixing it in like this, I'm making sure that it doesn't overpower what I'm trying to create, okay? And then with this darker mint, I'm just using my small round brush, and I'm just filling in all those spaces that overlap with other leaves. Remember, this is just to add shadows to the leaves and to make it look a little bit more realistic. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Just kind of use the lines that you have traced with the marker as guide. They will help you know where to paint and what to omit. Now I'm going to be using a little bit of Peachy Keen to paint the petals or leaves around the mint one. So the succulent that's on the bottom left of the platter, right? That one has some leaves that are a little bit lighter pink, so I'm going to be just watering down my Peachy Keen. It's not pink, but it's like peachy coral color, right? And I'm just going to be painting the rest of those leaves with that color. I'm using my small round brush just so I can get on those surfaces or on those leaves alone, and I'm not overlapping. It's okay if your color overlaps a little bit. We do kind of want to see that here and there, just because it adds a little bit of more realism to the design of the leaves, and it adds a little bit of an extra overlapping of colors. It's just really nice to see at the end, so feel free to go in however much you want. I just did it to the outer ring of leaves, but you're more than welcome to adjust it however you see fit. Alrighty, so now I'm going to be using that same small round brush to paint the tips of the succulent that's sprouting from the cactus to the left hand side of the platter. I know I rotate my platter a lot, so I apologize if it's hard to keep track of it, but just remember you can always look at the sample image at the beginning of this video and on the lesson plan as well. And then for this, I'm just adding a couple little highlights of that pink onto the succulent. Then once I'm done, I'm going to be painting the flowers on top of the cactus with the Peachy Keen color. Keep in mind that my mixture is kind of light, so I might want to go over it one more time just to make sure that my flowers are pretty bright and colorful. And remember, this part doesn't have to be watercolor, but it's nice if the paint is a little bit loosey. It's really up to you, whatever you prefer. If you prefer the paint to be a little bit more of a thicker consistency, you're more than welcome to not add water and keep on painting as you're doing it. Alrighty, so now I'm going to be adding some darker shadows onto the succulent with the Peachy Keen leaves. So keep in mind, now I'm going to be, instead of using the Peachy Keen or the mint, I'm going to be doing the same thing I did with the mint, but now I'm doing it to those outer leaves. And remember to use the marker lines as guidance. So you're just doing this wherever there's leaves that overlap, wherever there's something covering a leaf, that kind of thing, just to add a bit of a shadow to it. This adds dimension to the succulent itself, kind of gives it a little bit of that realism or those colors that appear only in nature. So it's okay if they overlap a little bit. I did where the Jumpin' Jelly overlapped the mint in some areas. I thought that was really cool, and the way that it looked after firing also was really interesting. They kind of shine over one another, so it's really nice to see that. And remember, I'm just using my small round brush and a little bit of watered down Jumpin' Jelly, and I'm just going on and adding a little bit of darker spots around the succulent. Alrighty, so now I'm going to mix the smallest little bit of Teal Tomorrow with that Jumpin' Jelly. I'm going to make sure that it's also kind of watered down, and I'm going to be using it to paint the last little laurel leaf thing to the top left of the platter with this color mixture. I kind of love this color. I call it my indigo. I just think it's such a pretty color. It has a little bit of the purple and the teal coming through, and just kind of looks muddy and interesting to me. And I'm just painting those little leaves the same way. This one I am kind of dabbing instead of brushing, just because I want to add a little bit of that watercolor tone or effect onto that leaf alone, so that way all the other leaves look different than this one. So here I'm adding another layer of darkness to my leaves on the succulent towards the bottom left, and I'm using that indigo color I created earlier, which remember is just a little bit of Jumpin' Jelly and Teal Tomorrow, and this just adds an extra darker tone to those leaves, and I just like the difference between the purple and this purple. And yeah, so I'm adding it around the same areas that I added the purple earlier, and it's just kind of filling in and adding a little bit more darkness around. Alrighty, so now I'm going to switch onto my small detail brush, and with it I'm just going to add some outlines to the cactus that was painted with the jumping juniper. This one is kind of middle right, and as you see, I'm just kind of doing some dashy lines or some zigzaggy lines, kind of like I did on the cactuses and whatnot. And I'm just outlining all the leaves. That's all I'm doing with this color. They're kind of messy lines, they're not perfect in any way. I'm just making sure that all their edges and borders are colored with this. This will add a nice effect to this cactus. And remember, no right or wrong way to do it. You're just giving it that kind of halo that these succulents kind of have. Alrighty, and again, I'm just using the detail brush, the short detail brush, to go ahead and add those outlines. And I'm just using that same indigo color. I might have added a little bit more purple, but it was just more because I was running out of paint kind of situation. But you're more than welcome to play around. If you wanted to change that up to something else, you can do that as well. Change it up to another color. Why not? Alrighty, so I'm going to rinse off my short detail brush, and now I'm going to be adding the same kind of effect I did to the succulent with purple, but this time I'm going to be doing on the green succulent with red, and I'm using red blaze and the short detail brush, and I'm just painting the tips of the leaves. So this part is just going around, following just the marker lines that you have already there. I'm just following them along, making sure that all the tips are covered, that you can see them overlap one another. That kind of adds that extra effect. And again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. I'm just kind of dabbing my paint, creating my lines. Remember that the harder you press, the thicker your lines will be, and the lighter you press, the thinner, so you might have to go over the surfaces a couple times. Alrighty, so next I'm going to be using that short detail brush again, and this time I'm just going to be painting the inner petals of the flower on top of the cactus. And I'm also going to be adding those flowers, kind of adding some detail lines to those flowers. So what that means is I'm just lightly painting in some lines. I'm making sure that my brush strokes are kind of thin and nice. So what that means is I'm not pressing too hard. I'm making sure that I'm just kind of creating some nice lines going around everything, and I don't overlap too much of that red on top of the peachy keen. With red, I'm going to be doing just a couple more dots on top of the pink tips of that succulent that's sitting next to the cactus. And just note that I'm doing that just to add an extra level of color to that. So this can be omitted as well if you don't want to do this part. If you don't think it's necessary, that's totally okay. You could also go on top of it with a little bit more peachy keen instead of red, if that's what you choose to do. I just wanted to add a little bit more of red to my piece. Alright, so next we're going to be using the Black Lab Fun Writer, if you're in the studio, or the Detail Brush and Black Lab, to go over the last name on the middle of the platter. This will just be really nice to let everything else dry and just focus on the center part of it all. Remember that if you're using the Fun Writer, you want to make sure that the tip is clean, that you will have the Fun Writer pin handy nearby, just so that way you can unclog it if it does get clogged. And remember to have something you can wipe the tip off just in case it does get dirty, because it will. And then if you're using the detail brush, I would highly suggest that you build your shape first, so like outline the shape first and then fill it in. I do that with the Fun Writer as well, but most of all with the detail brush, it's just nicer to have a shape already made and then go in and fill it in. Remember not to overload your brush if you're using the detail brush. You can also use the small brush or the small detail brush or short detail brush if that's what you choose. You choose whatever you feel the most comfortable with, and remember to clean that tip of the Fun Writer and make sure that your paint is flowing as it should if you're using the fun writer. And if you're using the detail brush, take your time, take it easy, don't rush, build your shapes and then fill them in. Another tip, no matter what tool you're using, make sure that you rotate your platter around. Get comfortable get comfortable holding it in different ways. That way you can ensure that your hand doesn't have to travel much and doesn't have to strain much. So just know that the reason I rotate my platter all the time is because I'm trying to paint that surface the most comfortable way I can. I'm making sure that I don't have to squeeze too hard just because my hand's gonna hurt or give out, and I'm trying to make sure that all the letters are consistent. So what that means is you're gonna have to make sure that you move your hand around on the bottom of your platter, kind of rotate it to make it more comfortable. Also take a break, stretch out your hand and that kind of thing if you need to. That way you can make sure that you have a good consistency all the way through. So here, using the Black Glove Fun Writer, I'm going to be painting that line that goes underneath the last name. Just note though that if you are in the studio and you're painting this on your own, or you're at home and you have some tape, if you wanted to use tape instead, make it easier on yourself, you could also do that. That's a tip. But when it comes to doing it with the Fun Writer, just make sure that you're holding your platter in a comfortable way. I have a ruler here just because I wanted to make sure that my line was straight, since I kind of sketched it on. So if it's easier for you to make sure that it's all straight, go ahead and use a ruler. Alrighty, so once we're done with the writing, we're going to be using the detail brush and Black Glove to paint the outlines on everything. I'm also going to use the Black Glove and the detail brush to paint the writing that's on top and bottom of the last name. Just keep in mind though, this part you can really do however you feel the most comfortable. I'm going around in a circle. I like to do things in a circle. I don't know why that's about or what that's about, but you can really do it however you feel the most comfortable. If you'd rather do the writing in the center first, you can do that. If not, you can just start outlining and then go at it once it's dry. I like to make sure that I have enough space to put my hand everywhere. So what I do is that I try to work on areas that I know I might need a little bit of room on, so I will outline those first and then go in and do the rest of it once that's dry. That way I can ensure that my hand will be put on a comfortable place and all my lettering would look good. When it comes to outlining, I highly suggest that you just use the tip of the brush. Don't press too hard. If your paint feels a little too thick, you can add a little bit of water to it, but not as the same amount of water that we did when watercoloring. This is just enough to loosen up the paint to make it more like the consistency of ink. And if you don't feel comfortable outlining straight onto your platter, you're more than welcome to practice on a piece of paper, on the table surface, whatever would make you feel a little bit more comfortable and more prepared to do it on the actual piece. Also remember that just because I outline everything doesn't mean you have to outline everything. You can make it your own by outlining some parts of it, not everything. You can also leave it unoutlined, or you could use the Black Glove Fun Writer. It's really up to you. Find whichever way you feel the most comfortable doing it and then go with that. I think at the end of the day, the idea is for it to look good, so however you feel like you can achieve that, that's the plan. So here I'm gonna let my camera keep going, and so that way you can just see me outlining. Just keep in mind though that I am very aware of where my brush is going and what I'm doing before I keep going. So just be mindful of that as you're outlining. Remember not to press too hard and to have fun with it. Take your time, make sure that things look good, and give your attention to whatever it is you're working on at the time. I work one thing at a time, and then once that's done, I can move on. As you see, my hand is in a surface that I have not outlined yet, and that's by design. I want to make sure that I'm letting things dry as I'm going, so that way if I do have to put my hand anywhere, it's on a dry surface. So now I stopped middle of the platter with the outlining, and now I'm gonna go over the lettering where it says the family. Keep in mind though, remember not to overload your brush. Take it easy, take your time, work one letter at a time, have fun with it. Another tip is that you can also use the short detail brush if that's what you prefer. I know some awesome people that love to outline that way or detail that way. So if you'd like to do your lettering that way or use the Fun Writer, you can also do that as well. Alright, now that I'm done with my lettering, I'm just gonna keep on outlining my succulents and cactuses. Lastly, I'm going to be writing the established year on the bottom of my platter, or the lower half of my platter. I'm using my detail brush. I'm using the black lab. Keep in mind you can also use a pencil to sketch out the year and then paint it in with a detail brush or the Fun Writer, whatever it is you're deciding to use. And yeah, so once you're done with this part, you're completely done with the piece. I would highly suggest that you sign and date the bottom so that way you remember when you painted it. So here's a little close-up of my final piece. As you can see, all my lines look really, really nice, and that's just because I took my time. So please take your time, make sure that your piece looks as best as it can. Here's the fired version, so you can kind of see how all the colors brighten up, and they look so cool once everything is fired. All right, thank you so much for painting with me. Have a great day, and bye-bye.